Sometimes the simplest stories are the most important, the easiest to digest, think about, take value from. Back during the golden age of science fiction, right before everything started getting really weird during the New Wave era, one author penned a story that really seemed to stick for some reason. I mean, hardly anyone's probably heard of it now, but at the time, this sort of simple, unassuming piece was voted the fourth best short story published before 1965 by the Science Fiction Hall of Fame anthology. It's called Microcosmic God, written by Theodore Sturgeon, and, it really doesn't break a lot of new ground, which is weird because that's usually sort of the prerequisite for beloved science fiction. This story is simple, straightforward. Some of the characters even just feel like stock archetypes. But I think there's something going on with this piece. I think through the haze of technological marvels and cosmic speculation, this piece of science fiction touches on something embedded deep within me as a creative, and probably within most of the people who love it. I think quietly, through the lens of its genre, it speaks to creatives about their passion and all the ways in which the world seeks to pervert it. Before I go on, I should say, we will be spoiling a lot of this story, so if you want to read what a lot of writers consider to be one of the best pieces of sci-fi ever written before we get into the details, I can actually help you with that. You can listen to this story for free by visiting thetalefoundry.com/audible or by clicking the link in the description. Fans of the show who sign up using that link now will get a whole month of Audible and one whole audiobook for free. Once you're in, go grab a copy of the Science Fiction Hall of Fame, Volume 1, 1929 to 1964. Not only will you get to hear Microcosmic God in full, you'll get over 20 other sci-fi masterworks as well. It's basically a small education in the golden era of the genre. Definitely worth the listen. And it's nice because it's all on audio too. Audible really lets you soak in your favorite stories while you work, or drive, or create whatever art it is that you create. It's what we use to do almost half of the research we do. And hey, it's a free trial, costs you absolutely nothing, and we get paid with every sign-up. So if you love what we're doing here, it's also a fabulous way to support the show. Again, that's thetalefoundry.com/audible. Go get your free book, listen to it, and then come back and watch the rest of this video. Now, on to the story. Here is a story about a man who had too much power and a man who took too much. But don't worry, I'm not going to get political on you. The man who had the power was named James Kidder, and the other was his banker. These are the first few lines of the story. James Kidder, always called Mr. Kidder, not Professor, not Doctor, Mr. Kidder, is a scientist. He, like many creatives, is obsessed with his work. All he wants to do is spend his days in his lab on his remote island, learning and creating. His banker, Conant, is happy to let him do so, as Kidder regularly sends him plans for wonderful creations, such as a virtually unbreakable cord made from banana fibers, an aluminum alloy stronger than steel, a new method for dirtless farming, a cure for the common cold, and a new form of uranium. These inventions, naturally, make the bank, and of course Conant, a lot of money. But Mr. Kidder has a secret. He did not invent all of these remarkable things. Kidder, a biochemist without a degree, college education was too slow for his intellect and curiosity, has something else which invents all these things for him. Or, more accurately, many somethings. Kidder, it turns out, has created a new form of life. His reason? Just like his college education, he found human technological advancement too slow. His genius is in making things, but he recognized his own limitations as a human being. So, he made a species of diminutive creatures to come up with his ideas for him. He calls these little life forms neoterics. In a lot of ways, they're like human beings, but there are some very meaningful differences. Mainly, they have very short lifespans, only about 15 days, which means that they evolve and develop much faster than humans ever could, passing through several generations in a matter of months. As they grow and progress, they rapidly outpace human knowledge and achievement, enabling them to model all of Kidder's fabulous inventions for him. Kidder does genuinely love these little people, his creation, but as the story title suggests, he is also technically their god. Kept in his lab in a carefully controlled atmosphere, he gives them problems to solve on a screen in their enclosure. If they deviate from the path he thinks is appropriate, he kills half the tribe. Like the Judeo-Christian God of the Old Testament, he has rules that must be obeyed. It's a pretty draconian form of love. The Neoterics even make their own creed, promising to dole out their own harsh punishment on those who threaten the safety of the tribe by deviating. Kidder probably wouldn't get his experiments past an ethics committee today, but ethical questions aside, this method of creation works extremely well for him. Until, of course, it doesn't. With this tiny civilization at his command, Kidder has enormous power. He also isn't very interested in doing very much with it. He's content. He loves what he's made and watching them develop his ideas over their brief lives. Conant, on the other hand, he has other, more ambitious plans. Ambitious in the vein of all traditional mustache-twirling villains. He tricks Kidder into creating an immensely powerful superweapon for him and forces the hapless scientist to let him set it up on his beloved research island to avoid government interference. Conant's goal? World domination, of course. Not very original, but with the money and power he's achieved through Kidder's work, it's actually at his fingertips. There's only one real catch for Conant here. He's a little scared of Kidder. In the words of the author, Conant's one great fear was that Kidder would someday take an interest in world events and begin to become opinionated. Because, of course, what could possibly be more terrifying to a suit than someone equally ambitious with actual creativity? You can probably guess how the story unfolds from here. Conant makes his move and attempts to force the president to comply with his demands. Kidder, meanwhile, races to find a solution, some way to protect himself and his beloved invention. But of course, as always, it's his little Neoterics who find the answer. They engineer an impenetrable force field to protect their little world. After all is said and done, we don't even quite know what happens to Kidder, but we can assume this little civilization continues to thrive long after, advancing far beyond anything humanity could dream up on its own. Like I said, but for a few creative wrinkles, it's a pretty simple story. So, why does this piece make top 5 for greatest science fiction stories of the early 20th century? Sci-Fi author Gene Wolfe once wrote, "The first SF story I read was Microcosmic God by Theodore Sturgeon. It has sometimes occurred to me that it has all been downhill from there." I don't know that I necessarily agree with that entire point. There's plenty of great SF out there, but I do love this one. And I think it's because, as someone who loves to create, I sort of see myself in Mr. Kidder, and suspect many other creatives do as well. Sturgeon makes it clear that he is not just some mad scientist, the usual vocation for a genius in many early science fiction tales. Kidder wasn't some dwarfed little gnome of a mad scientist you read about. His hobby wasn't personal profit, and he wasn't a megalomaniac with a Russian name and no scruples. He wasn't insidious, and he wasn't even particularly subversive. Kidder is a pleasant little man who simply wants to do his work in peace. Unlike Conant, he has no power fantasies other than to acquire ever more knowledge. Yes, his method of corralling the Neoterics is questionable, but his goal is never power. If you think about it, he's a pretty good embodiment of artistic dedication. He doesn't care about anything but his work. As long as he gets to learn and create, he can forgo everything else, even sleep. How many creatives get in the zone while working and wish they, like Mr. Kidder, had a way around the need for sleep, that waster of time? Even more, Mr. Kidder is a massive, unrepentant nerd. He lives the dream of every science fiction fan that was ever bullied for being passionate about their interests. How many kids wished they could dedicate their lives to their passions without fear of social ridicule? How many still do today? It is a relatable problem, something most human beings have gone through some time or other in their lives. And if we want to get very close to home for some people, Kidder's character goes far beyond passions and preoccupations and straight into neurology. In his book Neotribes, author Steve Silberman dedicates a whole chapter to the relationship between early sci-fi communities and autism. He notes that in these communities, personality quirks were less important than one's passion for the subject, and perhaps those quirks were more common among the fanbase anyway. I am certainly no expert on the matter, But I imagine that to many on the spectrum, and many who simply don't fit in, Mr. Kidder lives a somewhat idyllic existence, one of solitude and passion, with no concern for the difficulties of social interaction. In this story, Kidder is truly very powerful, and that power comes not from strength, social status, or even money, although Kidder does technically have a lot of it. It comes from passion. Sturgeon wanted this to be the story's central point. Quote, "A Superman need not be a powerful, commanding person, and with passion and dedication at the core of his superpowers, Kidder is for many of us a truly relatable Superman." Superman, mind you, not necessarily superhero. Passion is beautiful, but it doesn't always make right, does it? Kidder may be relatable in most ways, but there was that unethical streak which his dedication to the craft sort of blinded him to. And that wasn't the only thing he was blind to. As enrapturing as his work was, as dreamy as it may seem to be wrapped up in nothing but the thing you care about most, it prevented him from seeing what was truly happening until it was nearly too late. What enabled his work? What was he serving? Conant, the bank, the drive for profit and power. To approach Kidder's lifestyle, to live out their passions, many creatives have to sort of rely on these power-hungry individuals and institutions. Food and shelter don't just materialize before you when you create art or do science. Usually, you have to find an application that seems profitable to the people with the money. You need someone to publish it, market it, distribute it, make a product out of it. You can, of course, do this on your own, but the more time you dedicate to producing a product, the less time you have for the actual process of creation, and the further you drift from that idyllic, creative life. So, mostly you sort of turn a blind eye to the industry you feed because, in turn, it feeds you and lets you live the dream. Now, full stop, there is absolutely nothing wrong with artists getting paid. Artists should be paid for the value and worth they bring to the human experience, or at the very least enabled to do it securely. Even Foundry as a channel makes most of its money from, you guessed it, video sponsors. But that doesn't have to ruin the art. It doesn't have to pervert the act of creation itself. Although, sadly, I do think that is what ends up happening to a lot of creatives. Kidder is just one example of this. An extreme example, yes. Not every corporate fat cat wants actual world domination with powerful superweapons, and most creatives can't deliver that. But in general, this is a pretty widespread dynamic. The majority of the world's career artists are beholden to their patrons and platforms. The integrity of the craft is always on the line. Advertisers have the big bucks and are happy to shovel out for your endorsement of whatever poison they're peddling today. NFTs are free money in the artist's pocket, if you can turn a blind eye to the environmental impact. If you're desperate enough, work is work. Propaganda mills like PragerU need someone to animate and produce their disinformation campaigns. And bottom line, even if it's not what you want to make as an artist at all, hey, there's always money in adult content. As fabulous as Kidder's passionate lifestyle may seem, it's also that very same detached, aloof, willfully ignorant attitude that almost leads to the world's end in the story. A stark reminder that it's not only what we make that matters, but why we make it. Regardless of Conant's designs and Kidder's fixations, remember, it's the thing Kidder initially created for his own purposes, the invention of the neoterics, which makes any of this possible. And in the end, it's the neoterics that outlast everything else. The pure creation, not made for profit or power or even sustainability, but to benefit the creator and the world he occupies. That, according to the story, is what lasts. I don't necessarily think this is what the author was trying to say. More likely, I guess this piece is about technology and the threshold at which it supersedes the human ability to master it. But I also think it's interesting to find such a deeply artistic message buried in a piece like this. And, incidentally, I think that's part of what makes this one feel so timeless, despite its simplicity. Speaking of art and trying to make a living, I just want to let you know that there's actually a small team of humans helping me make this show. I'm just the talent, but it's really these amazing people who make what we do here possible. And there is so much they're chomping at the bit to create on this channel. From weird experimental videos to extremely niche topics to animations to interactive video game experiences, there's so much they'd love to try making. And if just 1% of our viewers were to contribute 1 cup of coffee's worth in our Patreon or here on YouTube memberships, I mean, at that point our humans could pretty much make anything they wanted to. Visit patreon.com/talefoundry or click the join button right beneath this video. Thanks so much to everyone who does. You have our love. Now get out there and keep making stuff up. But, for the right reasons. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye.